Chapter 25 of The Breaking Point by Mary Roberts Rinehart. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Shortly after that Dick said he would go to his room. He was still pale, but his eyes looked bright and feverish, and Bassett went with him, uneasily conscious that something was not quite right. Dick spoke only once on the way. "My head aches like the mischief," he said, and his voice was dull and lifeless. He did not want Bassett to go with him, but Bassett went nevertheless. Dick's statement that he meant to surrender himself had filled him with uneasiness. He determined, following him along the hall, to keep a close guard on him for the next few hours, but beyond that just then he did not try to go. If it were humanly possible he meant to smuggle him out of the town and take him East. But he had an uneasy conviction that Dick was going to be ill. The mind did strange things with the body. Dick sat down on the edge of the bed. "My head aches like the mischief," he repeated. "Look in that grip and find me some tablets, will you? I'm dizzy." He made an effort and stretched out on the bed. "Good Lord," he muttered. "I haven't had such a headache since—" His voice trailed off. Bassett, bending over the army kit bag in the corner, straightened and looked around. Dick was suddenly asleep and breathing heavily. For a long time the reporter sat by the side of the bed, watching him and trying to plan some course of action. He was overcome by his own responsibility and by the prospect of tragedy that threatened. That Livingstone was Clark, and that he would insist on surrendering himself when he wakened, he could no longer doubt. His mind wandered back to that day when he had visited the old house as a patient, and from that along the strange road they had both come since then. He reflected, not exactly in those terms, that life, any man's life, was only one thread in a pattern woven of an infinite number of threads, and that to tangle the one thread was to interfere with all the others. David Livingstone, the girl in the blue dress, the man twitching uneasily on the bed, Wilkins the sheriff, himself, who could tell how many others, all threads. He swore in a whisper. The maid tapped at the door. He opened it an inch or so and sent her off. In view of his new determination even the maid had become a danger. She was the same elderly woman who looked after his own bedroom, and she might have known Clark. Just what providence had kept him from recognition before this he did not know, but it could not go on indefinitely. After an hour or so Bassett locked the room behind him and went down to lunch. He was not hungry, but he wanted to get out of the room, to think without that quiet figure before him. Over the pretense of food he faced the situation. Lying ready to his hand was the biggest story of his career, but he could not carry it through. It was characteristic of him that before abandoning it he should follow through to the end the result of its publication. He did not believe, for instance, that either Dick's voluntary surrender or his own disclosure of the situation necessarily meant a conviction for murder. To convict a man of a crime he did not know he had committed would be difficult. But with his customary thoroughness he followed that through also. Livingstone acquitted was once again Clark, would be known to the world as Clark. The new place he had so painfully made for himself would be gone. The story would follow him, never to be lived down. And in his particular profession confidence and respect were half the game. All that would be gone. Thus by gradual stages he got back to David, and he struggled for the motive which lay behind every decisive human act. A man who followed a course by which he had nothing to gain and everything to lose was either a fool or was actuated by some profound unselfishness. To save a life? But with all the resources Clark could have commanded, added to his personal popularity, a first-degree sentence would have been unlikely. Not a life, then, but perhaps something greater than a life. A man's soul. It came to him then, in the great light of comprehension, the thing David had tried to do. To take this waster and fugitive, the slate of his mind wiped clean by shock and illness, only his childish memories remaining, and on it to lead him to write a new record. To take the body he had found, and the always untouched soul, and from them to make a man. And with that comprehension came the conviction, too, that David had succeeded. He had indeed made a man. He ate absently, consulting his railroad schedule and formulating the arguments he meant to use against Dick's determination to give himself up. He foresaw a struggle there, but he himself held one or two strong cards: the ruthless undoing of David's work, the involving of David for conspiring against the law, and Dick's own obligation to the girl at home. He was more at ease in the practical arrangements. An express went through on the main line at midnight, and there was a local on the branch line at 8. But the local train, the railway station, too, were full of possible dangers. After some thought he decided to get a car, drive down to the main line with Dick, and then send the car back. He went out at once and made an arrangement for a car, and on returning notified the clerk that he was going to leave and asked to have his bill made out. After some hesitation he said, "I'll pay $3.20, too, while I'm at it. Friend of mine there, going with me. Yes, up tonight." As he turned away he saw the short, heavy figure of Wilkins coming in. He stood back and watched. The sheriff went to the desk, pulled the register toward him and ran over several pages of it. Then he shoved it away, turned and saw him. "Been away, haven't you?" he asked. "Yes, I took a little horseback trip into the mountains. My knees are still not on speaking terms." The sheriff chuckled. Then he sobered. "Come and sit down," he said. "I'm going to watch who goes in and out of here for a while." Bassett followed him unwillingly to two chairs that faced the desk and the lobby. He had the key of Dick's room in his pocket, but he knew that if he wakened he could easily telephone and have his door unlocked. But that was not his only anxiety. He had a sudden conviction that the sheriff's watch was connected with Dick himself. Wilkins, from a friendly and gregarious fellow being, had suddenly grown to sinister proportions in his mind. And as the minutes went by, with the sheriff sitting forward and watching the lobby and staircase with intent, unblinking eyes, Bassett's anxiety turned to fear. He found his heart leaping when the room bells rang, and the clerk, with a glance at the annunciator, sent boys hurrying off. His hands shook and he felt them cold and moist. And all the time Wilkins was holding him with a flow of unimportant chatter. "Watching for any one in particular?" he managed, after 5 minutes or so. "Yes, I'll tell you about it as soon as... Bill, is Alex outside?" Bill stopped in front of them and nodded. "All right. Now get this. I want everything decent and in order. No excitement. I'll come out behind him, and you and Bill stand by. Outside I'll speak to him, and when we walk off, just fall in behind, but keep close." Bill wandered off, to take up a strand of extreme nonchalance inside the entrance. When Wilkins turned to him again, Bassett had had a moment to adjust himself, and more or less to plan his own campaign. "Somebody's out of luck," he commented. "And speaking of being out of luck, I've got a sick man on my hands. Friend of mine from home. We've got to catch the midnight, too." "Too bad," Wilkins commented rather absently. Then, perhaps feeling that he had not shown proper interest, "Tell you what I'll do. I've got some business on hand now, but it'll be cleared up one way or another pretty soon. I'll bring my car around and take him to the station. These hacks are the limit to ride in." The disaster to his plans thus threatened steadied the reporter, and he managed to keep his face impassive. "Thanks," he said. "I'll let you know if he's able to travel. Is this business you're on confidential?" "Well, it is and it isn't. I've talked some to you, and as you're leaving anyhow. It's the Jud Clark case again." "Sort of hysteria, I suppose. He'll be seen all over the country for the next 6 months." "Yes, but I never saw a hysterical Indian. Well, a little while ago an Indian woman named Lizzie Lazarus blew into my office. She's a smart woman. Her husband was a breed, dairy hand on the Clark ranch for years. Lizzie was the first Indian woman in these parts to go to school, and besides being smart, she's got Indian sight. You know these Indians, when they aren't blind with trachoma, they can see further and better than a telescope." Bassett made an effort. "What's that got to do with Jud Clark?" he asked. "Well, she blew in. You know there was a reward out for him, and I guess it still stands. I'll have to look it up, for if Maggie Donaldson wasn't crazy, someone will turn him up some day, probably. Well, Lizzie blew in, and she said she'd seen Jud Clark. Saw him standing at a second-story window of this hotel. Can you beat that?" "Not for pure invention. Hardly." "That's what I said at first. But I don't know. In some ways it would be like him. He wouldn't mind coming back and giving us the laugh if he thought he could get away with it. He didn't know fear. Only time he ever showed funk was when he beat it after the shooting, and then he was full of hooch and on the edge of DTs. "A man doesn't play jokes with the hangman's rope," Bassett commented dryly. He looked at his watch and rose. "It's a good story, but I wouldn't wear out any trouser seat sitting here watching for him. If he's living he's taken pretty good care for 10 years not to put his head in the noose, and I'd remember this too. Wherever he is, if he is anywhere, he's probably so changed his appearance that Telescope Lizzie wouldn't know him, or you either." "Probably," the sheriff said comfortably. "Still, I'm not taking any chances. I'm up for re-election this fall, and that Donaldson woman's story nearly queered me. I've got a fellow at the railroad station just for luck." Bassett went up the stairs and along the corridor, deep in dejected thought. The trap of his own making was closing, and his active mind was busy with schemes for getting Dick away before it shut entirely. It might be better, in one way, to keep Livingstone there in his room until the alarm blew over. On the other hand, Livingstone himself had to be dealt with, and that he would remain quiescent under the circumstances was unlikely. The motor to the main line seemed to be the best thing. True, he would have first to get Livingstone to agree to go. That done, and he did not underestimate its difficulty, there was the question of getting him out of the hotel now that the alarm had been given. When he found Dick still sleeping, he made a careful survey of the second floor. There was a second staircase, but investigation showed that it led into the kitchens. He decided finally on a fire escape from a rear hall window, which led into a courtyard littered with the untidy rubbish of an overcrowded and undermanned hotel, and where now 2 or 3 saddled horses waited while their riders ate within. When he had made certain that he was not observed, he unlocked and opened the window and removed the wire screen. There was a red fire exit lamp in the ceiling nearby, but he could not reach it, nor could he find any wall switch. Nevertheless, he knew by that time that through the window lay Dick's only chance of escape. He cleared the grating of a broken box and an empty flower pot, stood on the screen outside the wall, and then, still unobserved, made his way back to his own bedroom and packed his belongings. Dick was still sleeping, stretched out on his bed, when he returned to 320. And here Bassett's careful plans began to go awry, for Dick's body was twitching and his face was pale and covered with a cold sweat. From wondering how they could get away, Bassett began to wonder whether they would get away at all. The sleep was more like a stupor than sleep. He sat down by the bed, closer to sheer fright than he had ever been before, and wretched with the miserable knowledge of his own responsibility. As the afternoon wore on, it became increasingly evident that somehow or other he must get a doctor. He turned the subject over in his mind, pro and con. If he could get a new man, one who did not remember Jud Clark, it might do. But he hesitated until, at 7, Dick opened his eyes and clearly did not know him. Then he knew that the matter was out of his hands, and that from now on whatever it was that controlled the affairs of men, David's God or his own vague providence, was in charge. He got his hat and went out and down the stairs again. Wilkins had disappeared, but Bill still stood by the entrance, watching the crowd that drifted in and out. In his state of tension he felt that the hotel clerk's eyes were suspicious, as he retained the 2 rooms for another day, and that Bill watched him out with more than casual interest. Even the matter of canceling the order for the car loomed large and suspicion-breeding before him, but he accomplished it, and then set out to find medical assistance. There, however, chance favored him. The first doctor's sign led him to a young man, new to the town and obviously at leisure. Not that he found that out at once. He invented a condition for himself, as he had done once before, got a prescription and paid for it, learned what he wanted, and then mentioned Dick. He was careful to emphasize his name and profession and his standing back home. "I'll admit he's got me worried," he finished. "He saw me registered and came to my room this morning to see me, and got sick there. That is, he said he had a violent headache and was dizzy. I got him to his room and on the bed, and he's been sleeping ever since. He looks pretty sick to me." He was conscious of Bill's eyes on him as they went through the lobby again, but he realized now that they were unsuspicious. Bassett himself was in a hot sweat. He stopped outside the room and mopped his face. "Look kind of shot up yourself," the doctor commented. "Watch this sun out here. Because it's dry here, you Eastern people don't notice the heat until it plays the deuce with you." He made a careful examination of the sleeping man while Bassett watched his face. "Been a drinking man, or do you know?" "No, but I think not. I gave him a small drink this morning when he seemed to need it." "Been like this all day?" "Since noon, yes." Once more the medical man stooped. When he straightened, it was to deliver Bassett a body blow. "I don't like his condition or that twitching. If these were the good old days in Wyoming, I'd say he is on the verge of delirium tremens. But that's only snap judgment. He might be on the verge of a good many things. Anyhow, he'd better be moved to the hospital. This is no place for him." And against this common sense suggestion Bassett had nothing to offer. If the doctor had been looking he would have seen him make a gesture of despair. "I suppose so," he said dully. "Is it near? I'll go myself and get a room." "That's my advice. I'll look in later if the stupor continues. I'll have in a consultant." He picked up his bag and stood looking down at the bed. "Big, fine-looking chap, isn't he?" he commented. "Married?" "No." "Well, we'll get the ambulance, and later on we'll go over him properly. I'd call a maid to sit with him if I were you." In the grip of a situation that was too much for him, Bassett rang the bell. It was answered by the elderly maid who took care of his own bedroom. Months later, puzzling over the situation, Bassett was to wonder, and not to know, whether chance or design brought the Thorwald woman to the door that night. At the time, and for weeks, he laid it to tragic chance, the same chance which had placed in Dick's hands the warning letter that had brought him West. But as months went on, the part played in the tragedy by that faded woman with her tired, dispirited voice and her ash-colored hair streaked with gray, assumed other proportions, loomed large and mysterious. There were times when he wished that some prescience of danger had made him throttle her then and there, so she could not have raised her shrill, alarming voice. But he had no warning. All he saw was a woman in a washed-out blue calico dress and a fresh white apron, raising incurious eyes to his. "I suppose it's all right if she sits in the hall?" Bassett inquired, still fighting his losing fight. "She can go in if he stirs." "Right-ho," said the doctor, who had been to France and who had brought home some British phrases. Bassett walked back from the hospital alone. The game was up and he knew it. Sooner or later, in a way he tried to defend himself to himself. He had done his best. 2 or 3 days ago he would have been exultant over the developments. After all, mince things as one would, Clark was a murderer. Other men killed and paid the penalty. And the game was not up entirely at that. The Providence which had watched over him so long might continue to. The hospital was new. It was, ironically enough, the Clark Memorial Hospital. There was still a chance. He was conscious of something strange as he entered the lobby. The constable was gone, and there was no clerk behind the desk. At the foot of the stairs stood a group of guests and loungers, looking up while a bellboy barred the way. Even then Bassett's first thought was of fire. He elbowed his way to the foot of the stairs and demanded to be allowed to go up, but he was refused. "In a few minutes," said the boy. "No need of excitement." "Is it a fire?" "I don't know myself. I've got my orders. That's all." Wilkins came hurrying in. The crowd, silent and respectful before the law, opened to let him through and closed behind him. Bassett stood at the foot of the stairs, looking up. End of chapter 25.